I am absolutely thrilled this year that we get to welcome Dr. Lori Gottlieb, who is a psychologist and a New York Times bestselling author of a book called Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, which has sold over 1 million copies, which is absolutely astonishing and has been translated into more than 30 languages. And she is a very sought after and renowned teacher, psychologist, and speaker who is also a member of our community. And in addition to her clinical practice, Dr. Gottlieb writes for the New York Times, the Ask the Therapist advice column, and you've probably seen her and heard her out in the world. She writes for The Atlantic, for many different journals and lots of publications. I think was just on Oprah last week, and the Today Show, and the Daily Show, and Good Morning America, and all of those places. And now she's here at IKAR. So welcome, Dr. Lori Gottlieb. We're absolutely thrilled to have you.
And is this on? Is this working?
Yeah.
Okay. So I am not a doctor, just to clarify. I am a psychotherapist, and I know in the Jewish community, we just assume doctor, but
welcome, Lori Gottlieb. Okay. So I invited Lori to engage me in conversation in a kind of sermon dialogue. And I think that our source sheets are going around the room as I'm doing this introduction. What I wanted to speak to you about is the intersection of Jewish and therapeutic wisdom on issues that are really of deep concern for us today, including and especially how to stay in relationship with people who break your heart. And the fact that you're all here today after yesterday's sermon means that you already know how to stay in relationship with people who break your heart. So thank you for coming back today. But I realize as I've navigated the last many years that I yearn for a kind of psychological wisdom that will help me understand the choices that we are making as human beings, both as individuals and as a community, and how we can stay centered and empathic even when we're hurting, and how we can continue to grow in resiliency. And I have many times looked to you and your wisdom, along with the wisdom of a number of other psychologists, doctors and not doctors in this room, who really share a deep insight about the human heart and soul. And so I am very much looking forward to this conversation. We're bringing together two interwoven traditions here: the practice of psychotherapy with its emphasis on curiosity and narrative and storytelling and relationship, and the Jewish tradition, which of course is ancient wisdom to help us live more meaningfully and more purposefully and more relationally. And I almost called this session IKAR Goes to Therapy, because we all need to go to therapy. But what we ended up calling it was We Don't Have Forever: Living Meaningful, Connected Lives with the Time We've Got, which is a title I came up with after we did some prep work together. And after I reread your book in preparation for this, really feel a great urgency around we don't have forever. How can we live more meaningfully and more connected lives with whatever time we've got? Before we go into the text that is before you and then into conversation, I want to dedicate this conversation to the memory of a dear psychologist in our community, Dr. Victor Morton, who was a beloved therapist to many, many people, and who led with wisdom and led with love. And I really pray that his memory will always be a blessing. So I want to invite you to take out your source sheet, and I'm going to help us enter this conversation by way of what happens after the story that we just read in the Torah portion today. So we just read the story of the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. Hopefully you were following along in the text. And this is the story of how our ancestor Abraham nearly slaughters his son Isaac as an offering to God. Earlier in the day, Rabbi Marcelo Bronstein, who also comes from both the Jewish tradition and the therapeutic tradition, hinted that Sarah is delivered, according to many of the Midrashim, the news that Abraham has actually effectively slaughtered his son Isaac, even though we know that Isaac survives. And what I wanted to look at today is the story after the story. Right after the Akedah, which appears in Parshat Vayera in the book of Genesis, begins Parshat Chayei Sarah. And it begins by saying that Sarah's lifetime, the span of her life, came to 127 years, and then she died. And the rabbis make this connection that Marcelo offered earlier today, that there's no way that Sarah dies right after the Akedah and that those two things don't have something to do with each other. And what they posit is therefore that she must have somehow heard news of what happened there, and it took the life out of her. So look at Rashi in the second source. The narrative of the death of Sarah follows immediately on the story of the binding of Isaac, because through the news of the binding that her son had been prepared for sacrifice and had in fact almost been slaughtered, she received a great shock. Imagine hearing that news, that her husband took her baby, her child, whether he's 13 years old or in his 30s, the rabbis argue, but her beloved child, whom she dreamt of and prayed for and loved with all of her heart, up the mountain and nearly killed him. And she received a great shock. Literally, her soul flew from her, and then she died. And the Gur Aryeh, this is the Maharal of Prague, writing in the 16th century, says, it appears that Sarah heard that he had almost died, and that it was only by the smallest margin that he had not been slaughtered, and she was overcome with terror upon the realization that her son's life hung in the balance for even a moment. Meaning some of the Midrashim say that she heard the news that he had actually been killed, but even more moving is that she knew he was still alive. But what she recognized was that he was this close to dying. And here I want to credit Dr. Erin Lieb-Smokler, who shared the connection between the Gur Aryeh and Aviva Zornberg in her intro to Torah in Troubled Times, which came out several years ago. Look at Aviva Zornberg's words here, one of the great teachers of Torah in the world. What does it mean, receive this kind of shock? Well, behala could be something like a shock, but the word actually is not exactly shock. It's something like dizziness, even nausea. It's a kind of vertigo. It's not knowing where a person is, a shock in the sense of the loss of orientation. I don't even know where I am in the world. And Dr. Zornberg says it is a very common reaction to a situation in which one is almost. The reaction is a sense of theological vertigo, of asking, what does anything mean if this is the case? If it's really just a matter of a millimeter, if it could go this way or this way, how do we even understand God's providence? How do we understand anything if this is the way that the world works? Sarah doesn't die thinking that Isaac's dead. She knows he's alive after the Akedah, but only by a hair's breadth. And that immediately sets something awry, does something radical to her sense of order and coherence in the world. Sarah recognizing that life is that fragile, the almost, makes everything in her life go awry. Now, I was invited some years ago to speak with the survivors of the Tree of Life shooting in Pittsburgh. And I was so moved by this idea. What does it mean to acknowledge the almost, and then make a choice to live? And what I offered them was that perhaps our Jewish communal collective gatherings give us one way to hold the almost, to know that we stand on the cusp of life and death, and that we're given sometimes with blessing the opportunity to choose life nevertheless. One of those ritual choices is Birkat Gomel, which some of you know and some of you have said. We call before the Torah someone who's experienced the almost. And we have them put to words what there are no words for, which is, I don't know why sometimes people live and sometimes people die from an experience like the one that I just had, but I feel I need to say out loud that I'm just glad that I'm here. And the whole community responds saying, Amen, we see you. That's it. And that somehow creating that kind of ritual container for the theological vertigo is precisely what gives us the capacity to move through and hold and acknowledge the precarity of life. That's the Jewish response, one of the Jewish responses to that kind of awareness. And Lori Gottlieb is really an expert in the therapeutic responses to that kind of deep and profound awareness of the fragility of it all, of the recognition that we don't have forever. And it is our responsibility, our obligation to figure out how to live through the time we have with both meaning and purpose and connection. So first, Lori, that was a very long introduction, and now you'll do most of the rest of the talking. But I wanted to set a textual framework for us to have this conversation. And I wonder if you can begin by just sharing your response. How is it that through your own therapeutic work that you do with your clients and that your wonderful therapist did with you, which you speak about so beautifully and lovingly in the book, how is it that you help people navigate the almost, and find meaning in life even still?
I think what you're talking about is that we don't do well with uncertainty, that the uncertainty is terrifying, and that knowledge that Sarah had of, this almost happened, this could happen, when we think we know how the world works and what the rules of the world are. And I think especially at this time, the rules are very confusing to so many of us. I think about how we always say that we prefer the certainty of misery than the misery of uncertainty. That, we would rather be in a situation that is not great because it's certain rather than go outside of our comfort zone and do something that is uncertain. And I think that people have to accept that we don't have control in the way that we do, which doesn't mean we have no control, but we may not have control over the things that we want to control.
You write and speak about how change and loss travel together, and how people think that they want to change, but they don't want to lose something, and you can't change without losing something. Can you talk about that idea? Because it feels so perfectly apropos to the High Holy Day season.
Yeah, I think that, this is why New Year's resolutions often don't last past March, if that.
March.
I was going to say, if that. Because I think that change is hard. We are giving up something. We lose the familiar. We lose what we knew. And again, that's going into this uncertainty. And I think that, it can be really hard to give up something that feels like home, even if home is not where we are or we've outgrown it. And so, and I think the other thing about change that makes it hard is people assume that you're going to make a decision to make a change, and then you're going to make the change, like a New Year's resolution, like I'm going to be more healthy, or I'm going to, leave this relationship, or I'm going to, apply for a new job, or whatever the thing is. And it's a positive step, but you can't just change. There are stages to change. And so when people come to therapy, they start with pre-contemplation, which is you don't even know that you're thinking about making a change. Most people, I don't know how many of you have been to therapy. I assume probably many in this room.
Probably
But, when people come to therapy, often the thing is, they say, I want something to change. And the thing that they want to change is someone else. What do you want to change? I want to change someone else. And it's true, by the way, that there are, difficult people in our lives, and that the people who actually, the people who come to therapy are there because the people in their lives who should come to therapy have not. So they're in therapy. And so, but you still have choices. You can change. You can change your response to the difficult circumstance or person or whatever is out there. And that's where people, I think, get tripped up. So they're kind of in pre-contemplation. They don't realize that they're going to need to make a change. And there's contemplation, which is sort of like, oh, maybe there's something I can do differently. And then there's preparation, where you say, okay, what steps do I need? What support do I need? What are sort of the concrete infrastructure type of things that I need to begin to make the change? And then there's change. This is not the last stage of change. The last stage of change is maintenance, which is how do we maintain a change? And it's like a sine curve, it's not linear. And so in maintenance, you're going to fall back. You're going to, not meet, you haven't inhabited that change yet. And that's where the uncertainty is. You're in like this new, it's like you landed in a new place. You don't know the mores, the language, the culture, and you're going to need to learn it. And it's going to be hard. And every time that you kind of fall back from the change, that's when people give up on their New Year's resolutions or whatever kind of resolution. Or whatever kind of change they want to make. And so what you really need in that moment is self-compassion. And people think that if you have self-compassion, that you're not holding yourself accountable. And it's quite the opposite, that the more that you can have compassion for the fact that, this was hard, and then look at, if you're not bathed in shame because you're not self-flagellating, but you're being kind to yourself, you can say, what made it hard for me? What are the things that I need to know? What kind of support do I need? So I think that when people really look at change as this process and not as a decision and then an action, we're much more able to not only make the change, but maintain the change and then inhabit it, and it becomes a new part of our lifestyle.
What you're saying reminds me of two rabbis and teachers of mine. One is Rabbi David Hartman, who I remember said in a lecture many years ago in Jerusalem, he went to therapy for 20 years in order to realize that he can't change his mother, right? Because we go thinking that someone else is the problem, as you say. And what does it take to turn the mirror toward ourselves? And this is so much the work of this season and what we'll be working on together over Yom Kippur. What does it mean to allow ourselves to see ourselves in a different light? And the other is something that Rabbi Jonathan Sachs wrote years ago about a family that he was working with. The child had a stammer, and he realized that the child was working with experts to relieve himself of the stammer and couldn't. And he realized that the reason why was because that had become part of his identity. And as much as he wanted to let it go, it was what he understood about himself. And so we have to, in many ways, create a new sense of self. In the language of Reb Soloveitchik, create the creation of a new I. If we want to let something else go, we have to embody something new. And I think that's part of what Birkat HaGomel, which we just looked at, allows us to do. It allows us to take the moment of the vertigo, the shaking, the almost, and recast it as a blessing that we don't understand. And that gives us the permission to tell a different story. And I will come back to you about what it means, the stories we tell. But one of the reasons that I've been so compelled by your writing in this time and why I wanted us to have this experience is because you don't only work on individuals developing new pathways for healing and living, but you're very focused on relationships and connections between people. And you said something to me that was so precious, that in this time, we're too willing to give up relationships as if they're not the very heart of our being. And so somebody offends us or upsets us, and we're so fragile that we just want to cut them out instead of doing the hard work of retethering to life and to connection. And I wonder if you can help us think through that a little bit.
Yeah, I feel like this is so much in the zeitgeist right now. And I write, my New York Times column, people write in letters from all over the world, and you kind of see what's happening in the culture when you see the same question coming up over and over and over. And so many people are saying, I'm estranged from my sibling, I'm estranged from my parents, I don't want this friend in my life because this happened or that happened, or someone cut me off and I don't understand it. Right? We were friends for 30 years. What happened? How could one incident that I don't even understand be the end of a 30-year friendship? And I think that, what we're seeing is that this kind of orientation of, if this person causes me any discomfort, if I have to, if they don't understand my perspective or agree with my perspective. I have, a column recently was somebody writing in saying, her husband doesn't want their 2-year-old seeing her parents anymore because they had different political views, and that translated to different values, and they don't want their 2-year-old around that. And I think if you were on Instagram, people would say, oh, cut them off. They're terrible people or whatever. You don't want your child around that. And my response was about, your child lives in the world. We all live in the world, and people are not homogeneous. That, these are loving grandparents. And the fact that your child is going to be exposed, first of all, at 2 years old, they're playing Legos or whatever they're doing. But, as your child grows up, it's so important to have this intergenerational connection. And if, the kid hears things out in the world that are confusing or different from, what you talk about in your household, that's a great opportunity for a conversation. Well, what did you think about what grandma said? Or, what was that like? Or what do you think about that? Here's how we think about that. What do you think about that? We can't live in a bubble, and we don't live in a bubble. But I think with all this, the way the world is now, everybody's like in their silos, and nobody's willing to hear anybody else and understand the why. It's not just you believe that, it's how did you come to believe that? And usually there's a story like, well, when I was young, this happened and I saw this thing happen, and then I believed that these people are this way, right? And so I don't want those people in my community because, whatever the experience was. But when you get to the why underneath, it's like you see yourself maybe not in their views, but in their humanity. And you realize that you had experiences that helped you to form whatever values you have or beliefs you have. And maybe there's some room for both of you to not be so rigid around your views and to understand more about what is it that we both want and where do we overlap.
It's interesting. Somebody approached me after my sermon yesterday and was telling me how hard it was for her to hear what I was saying. And she shared a little bit about her childhood, and she had experienced a terrible trauma. Mm-hmm. And she said, you can only talk this way because you've been blessed to grow up here in this environment, and where people really are open-hearted toward each other and are willing to sit together and see each other, but it's very naive, she said. And I'm sure she's not the only person who feels that way when they hear people like me speaking the way that I do. And I had a tremendous compassion for her because there's a real wound in the heart of her life. And I understand that if I had grown up that way, I might have also made the same choices. And I think that part of what you're writing and also Marcelo's teaching and many of my teachers who are in this room does is draw us into a deeper moment of not combative reaction to somebody who sees the world differently than us, and not a sense of I'm right and you're wrong, even though I think I'm right and she's wrong. But really trying to acknowledge that we have different foundational narratives. And go ahead.
But I think what you're getting at in the moment, I think, of connection for the two of you was that she felt understood. You don't have to agree with her. It's different. Understanding doesn't mean I agree. It means I understand why you feel the way you feel or think the way you think. I remember this from so many years ago. It still stuck with me. I was seeing a couple, and this woman said to her husband, you know what 3 words I really want to hear more? And he, of course, said, I love you. But the words were, she said, no, it's I understand you. She just wanted to be understood, because understanding is a form of love. Mm. And I think that when, in a recent column, there were somebody wrote in, he was estranged, his sibling wouldn't talk to him anymore because they had a disagreement over an inheritance. And that happens a lot. And he was saying, I just don't understand. And I want my brother to understand why I did what I did with our parents and the inheritance and why it all happened. And what I said, and he wanted to come up with a solution. And I said, reconciliation is not about resolution. Reconciliation is about recognition. Mm. And instead of going with this orientation to your brother of, I want you to understand why I did what I did, it's, how can I understand how you are hurt? Mm-hmm. But we don't do that enough. We're so intent on making sure that the other person understands us that we don't first ask the question. And it has to come first is, help me understand you. And you don't have to agree with their perspective, but it will help you to understand them better, mm-hmm. and they will be more open to understanding you better.
When you're saying, I see right over your shoulders Aviva Hassan, our dear friend who runs New Ground and really has dedicated her life to this work of bringing Muslims and Jews in our city into conversation and relationship with each other so that we can see and understand one another's narratives. Not that we will agree with each other and not that we give up our own stories, but that we expand our hearts so that there's room for another story too. And Aziza, I want to thank you for your incredible work. And it's so meaningful for me that you're here with us, and bless you with continued strength in this year, and much love to you and your family. And I think that many of us are afraid that if we make more room to hear someone else's perspective, that we lose our own, that we're giving up something, we're betraying ourselves or our family or our people or our rightness because we're making room for someone else. And I was very moved by your response to this man that you just cited. And you said, what does he need me to understand about him? Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean that the sibling is right. It just means that we're big enough to be able to hold space for his story and also affirm our own story at the same time. And something shifts in us. It has to when we make room for that. I do want to say that I've seen you also supporting ending a relationship when necessary as an act of self-love. And so I don't want to leave us here with the sense that you're saying that your rabbi and therapist for the day are saying, keep going back to that abusive partner because it's your responsibility to understand him. There is a line where you, I believe, suggest that in order to protect ourselves, we do have to establish boundaries in relationship.
Right. Well, I think that there are times when there's a mental health issue or, a real sort of danger that it's not good to be around that person, and you can kind of limit how you show up in that relationship or how much you show up in that relationship. But I think that what we see sort of on social media is like, well, that person's a narcissist. They didn't respect your boundary and, cut them off. And it's just so knee-jerk. And, everybody's toxic. They're a narcissist. They're gaslighting you. And we don't really look at, what does it mean? Setting a boundary doesn't mean I'm dictating what the other person's behavior is. That's the big misconception about boundaries. It's like, to use an example that I think maybe many of us can relate to is like, Mom, if you criticize my appearance when I'm with you, right? I'm not going to want to be around you as much. So if you criticize my appearance, I really want to have fun with you. I love being with you. But when you do that, it really makes it hard. So I'm going to end the conversation when you do that. And then you have to 100% of the time, not 99%, not 98%, end the conversation lovingly, not, I can't believe you didn't respect my boundary, but, hey Mom, you know what? It seems like we're back in this again. Let's talk another time, really looking forward to it. If your mom wants to be in conversation with you, she's going to realize that there's literally no possible way she can be in conversation with you if she criticizes your appearance, and it starts to shape her behavior. We do this with our children, by the way, too. But I don't know why we think that just because someone's physically an adult that they aren't sort of a child inside sometimes. And it's not that you have to kind of heal your parents' childhood wounds, but they didn't have that kind of structure around sort of what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. And you're holding the boundary with yourself. So it's not dependent on what's happening out there. You're saying, here's what I'm going to do. If you criticize my appearance or comment on my appearance in a negative way, I'm going to end the conversation. Doesn't matter what they do. You know what you're going to do. So if you don't do it, you're breaking the boundary with yourself.
Oh, that is such good Torah for us. Thank you so much for that. It reminds me of something that I read that Brené Brown wrote years ago, and I think of it all the time. She asked 4,000 people to name the person who was most compassionate in their lives. Who do you know who's the most compassionate person? And then she went and interviewed those 4,000 people to find out what consistencies could be found among those people. And it was not gender, and it was not age, and it was not childhood trauma, and it was not financial stability. It was ability to set boundaries. And this is so shocking because you think if somebody who's a boundary setter that they're harsh and they have restrictions. And yet she shared one story of someone who would throw this Christmas party every year, and every year the sister-in-law would come and get really, really drunk and ruin the party. And she said at some point she had to establish a boundary and said, I would love to have you at my Christmas party this year. If you come, you will not have one drink. If you have so much as one drink, you will be asked to leave. If you would like to drink on Christmas, you're welcome to, but not at my house. And the sister-in-law was so angry, and you're so cruel, and how could you speak to me like this? And ended up coming and didn't drink, and the party wasn't ruined. So we're able to be compassionate toward people once we've established, if you're going to talk about the way I look, I'm going to end this phone call.
Well, I think, the thing is that boundaries, there's the misconception about boundaries is that they divide you or they keep you apart. Boundaries are bridges, because if you weren't interested in that relationship, you would just end the relationship. So a boundary is saying, I want to be in relationship with you. I am building a bridge here so that we can be in relationship. And I think when you present it as, I want to be closer to you, this is preventing us from being closer. I want you at the party. But when you drink, it ruins the party or it makes it difficult for us, right? So I want you there. And, we can't have you there otherwise, but I want you there. So you can choose not to come, we would be sad, or you can choose to come so that we can be in relationship with each other.
That's great. Okay. We have only a few minutes left. So I want to ask you, I know that there's a teaching from Pirkei Avot, from the Mishnah, that says, Hevei dan et kol adam l'chaf zuchut, that we should judge every person favorably, give people the benefit of the doubt. And I feel you keep citing social media, and I'm thinking about Rabbi Jensen's beautiful sermon from Erev Rosh Hashanah, and there is a kind of toxicity in the culture that is training us to assume the worst of people, and then they have to somehow break through that and prove that they're actually decent. And our tradition teaches us, actually, we should train ourselves the opposite, to assume that people are decent and good, and then protect ourselves when we find out that they might not be. And I know that you have a few stories about really pushing to find what's likable or decent or good in a person, and you say it's your job to find it. There is something in every person. And so as we are deep now in these Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, these days of self-reflection, self-scrutiny, I think it's an important moment for us to look at ourselves and remember the tiny bit of goodness, of pure goodness in ourselves, and to retrain ourselves in this countercultural way to look at each other. When you look at Janine, it's easy, but other people, it's not as easy to see the goodness in them immediately. So what can we hold in mind as we walk through the world this week, and then for the many months and God willing years after that, that can help us view the world through the lens of that goodness, that there is something buried deep inside that it's our work to try to access?
When I was training to be a therapist, one of my supervisors said, because we were sort of complaining about some of the more difficult people who came in, and she said, there's something likable in everyone. It's your job to find it. And I thought that was so applicable to daily life. We all encounter all kinds of friction and difficulty and discomfort, and people speak sometimes with their behavior as opposed to their words, because they don't know how to communicate what they're feeling. So the first patient that I write about, and maybe you should talk to someone, is a patient who's extremely insulting to me. He's rude, he's devaluing, misogynistic, you name it. We can go down the list. But he ends up being the person that people by the end of the book love the most. They just want to hug him. They're rooting for him, because you get to know sort of what was, he was speaking the unspeakable with his behavior. Don't get close to me. Right. I am wounded. I can't handle another trauma. I can't handle the terror of, losing love again. Right. Losing something precious to me. So I think that, we have to understand that there is something likable in everyone, and it is our job to find it. That doesn't mean that you have to tolerate bad behavior. But I think if you can look for the other thing, you're going to get better behavior back. So if you can find, if people see that you see something in them, that you see something of value, that you see something that is in their kind of their soul. I write about sort of the neshama in my book. If you see something in them, they're going to respond differently to you. We're all doing a dance with each other. And if you change your dance steps, the other person is either going to have to change their dance steps or they're going to leave the dance floor, right? Usually people change their dance steps a little bit somehow, and then you see a different side of them and you're doing a different dance with them. And it reminds me of, often when I give talks, I'll say to people, who is the person that you talk to most in the course of your life? Is it your parent? Is it your partner? Is it your sibling? Is it your best friend? And, lots of hands for those. But the person we talk to most in the course of our lives is ourselves. And what we say to ourselves isn't always kind or true or useful. And I think those 3 criteria applied to both ourselves and others are so important. I had a client who didn't realize, I think a lot of us don't realize how we talk to ourselves, which means it's also how maybe we think and our thoughts about other people. And I said to her, you know what, I want you to write down everything you say to yourself over the course of the week, and next week when you come back, we'll talk about it. And she was so dismissive of that, like, no, I'm not like that. But I could hear it, and she couldn't hear it. And so she came back the next week and she started crying. She pulled out her phone of everything she had written down and she said, I'm such a bully to myself. And they were things like there was a typo in an email, and she said, I was writing this email, I saw a typo, and immediately she said to herself, you're so stupid. It was just like the thing she said to herself. She caught her reflection as she was walking down the street, and she said, you look terrible today. And of course, she didn't look terrible that day. So you think about how we have that cognitive bias toward the negative, that how we immediately go to the, lack of self-compassion. And I think we do that with others. We see the thing that sticks out to us, that irritates us, the typo, maybe you don't look your best today, whatever it is. And that's what we focus on instead of, wow, you typed that great email. We don't, that's not the message we get. Or you know what, you look pretty good today given that you got 5 hours of sleep because you had to stay up late to do that project, right? That's not the orientation. So can we just ask ourselves with our thoughts about ourselves and others, is it kind? Is it true? Is it useful? All 3 criteria have to be met. Otherwise, move on.
This is so great. 1 year for Kol Nidre. Many of you were in the room when this happened. We were at the other location. It was early years of IKAR. And it's a rental space, so every single thing has to be set up. Every one of these signs, every one of these chairs, every one of the books. And literally everything went right. Our team was amazing. And then everybody rose and the ark was opened for Kol Nidre, and there were no Sifrei Torah inside because it was like the one thing we forgot. And I thought, isn't that so like life, and that will be the only thing that we will remember from this Kol Nidre. I want to take the rabbinic privilege to invite us to engage Lori's exercise in the course of this next week before Yom Kippur, and just track some of the inner monologue, because I think that what your client found is something that we will all find. I've never really thought of it this way, but we're constantly harming ourselves with our own words toward ourselves. And how can that not impact the way that we speak to and engage each other? We have to close, but I want to say a couple of things. One, if you haven't read Lori's book, please do. It's really wonderful, and it's an incredibly honest accounting of your own journey, both as a therapist and also as somebody on a healing journey. And it's so wise. There's so many nuggets, and it's very, very readable, as a million people can attest to. So I also want to, there's so many elements that we spoke to, starting with this fragility and this, when you realize you don't have forever and you realize that your loved ones don't have forever, it brings us to a deeper realization that the way that we engage now matters. And I want to tap into that mindfulness. I want to invite us to think about the stories that we're telling about ourselves and the space that we're making for other people's stories, whether the other people are our partners, our mothers, our family members, or other people who see the world in very different ways and read the news in very different ways. And I want to close by you write so much about your wonderful therapist who you call Wendell in the book, and you said it's Wendell's job to help me edit my own story. And because you say we keep stepping in the same puddle. Why are we doing the same things again and again and again? This is such high holy day Torah. And some of us are blessed enough to have therapists or rabbis or dear friends or partners who can be our spiritual chavruta and say to us, I'm going to help you edit that story that you keep telling about ourselves. And some of us don't have those relationships yet. And I hope that in the course of our time that we can help become that person for each other, become the spiritual chavruta that the other needs, that can reflect back the beauty of the other, and also reflect back and say, I know that this is hurting you. Why do you keep doing this? Help me understand.
Right. And in the book, I write about the difference between idiot compassion and wise compassion.
Yes.
And I think we want to give each other wise compassion. So idiot compassion is, we feel like we're supporting people that we care about by supporting their faulty narrative. We all are unreliable narrators. We all tell the story through a very specific lens that is only our own. And often we're missing the other elements of the story. And so, when you see people, it's like, you see someone do the same thing over and over. It's like if a fight breaks out in every bar you're going to, maybe it's you, but we don't want to say that to our friends. And so, because we want to keep friends. So we give them idiot compassion and we just say, you're right, they were wrong. I can't believe they did that. You go, girl, whatever. And you're not really helping them because you're not helping them to see the kind of story that they're enacting. And so, you don't want to be your friend's therapist, but you're a person in the world and you see things and you observe and you care about this person. And there's a way to say something like, I wonder, offering what we do in therapy, which is wise compassion, where we kind of hold up a mirror to you and help you to see something that maybe you haven't been willing or able to see. Can you say to someone that you see struggling with the same thing over and over, like, what do you think is going on here? And, it's not like you could say really clearly, well, the reason is this, but you don't, you want to give them the opportunity to self-reflect in a loving, compassionate space. That's why we call it wise compassion, because it's incredibly compassionate. And it's kind of like just starting from a place of curiosity with them. Like, this seems to be happening a lot. I know you're really suffering. What do you think is going on?
Yeah.
Even that.
Mm. It's beautiful. Okay, we're going to close now with a little micro practice. And so I want to invite us, and normally I would say turn to someone you don't know, but I'm going to say if you're with somebody who you do know, it's totally okay to turn to them, but I want to make sure that everybody has somebody. So if you're seated in threes, you're going to have to find a separate, another one somewhere. I just want to invite us to turn to another person and just look into each other's eyes for 30 seconds. And I know, everyone's so jittery. So wait. I'm going to give more instruction. Hold on a minute. So this is what I'm going to invite us to do. Shh. Jews, listen. I want to invite you to look into another person's eyes for 30 seconds and to try to see them with wise compassion, to understand that they are holding a story and that you are here to receive it without words, and to allow them to see you too. That's a lot of work for 30 seconds, but we're beginning to train ourselves in building new muscles during these holidays. And so 30 seconds of silence in which we see and we are seen, and then we'll close. Thank you, Lori Gottlieb. Thank you all.